Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Jim Springer, and thank you for joining us as we learn about the fascinating world of the microbiome and how amazingly your gut influences the functioning of the brain, the immune system, and other organs. Now, just a few things before we get started. This webinar does have a chat feature where you can ask questions, and we'll get to as many as we can during the last 10 minutes of the program. If we don't have time for all the questions, we'll be sending out an email with all of your answers along with a recorded version of this webinar within a week. And finally, everybody in attendance today will receive a 15% discount on our entire BrainMD store. We'll present that code at the end of this webinar and include it in our follow-up emails. Please make sure to check your spam folders. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Amon is unable to speak today, literally, because he's temporarily lost his voice. He is present, however, and watching, so it's my pleasure now to introduce you to one of our very special Amen Clinic doctors. She's a graduate of Brown University and Brown University Medical School with honors and completed her residency at Georgetown University. At Amen Clinic, she specializes in the treatment of Lyme disease, environmental toxicity, methylation disorders, and other chronic conditions. She's also known around here as the microbiome expert. Please welcome Dr. Eboni Cornish.
All right, good evening, everyone. I hope you're all eating a healthy lunch or a healthy dinner, because our goal today is to really express to you the importance of understanding the gut-brain connection. And this is an area of medicine that I'm very passionate about. I'm very passionate about our new product. All of my patients know that this is one area that I focus on a lot. So let's buckle up, because Dr. Kidd and myself, we have quite a bit to discuss with you today. And we're going to just start first with just giving an overview of the gut-brain axis. Now, I'm a functional medicine physician. So what that means is, even though I'm family practice in training, my major goal is to look at the entire body. And that goes from your genetics, from your liver function, inflammation and immunity, hormones and metabolism, your structural function, if you have any aches and pains or bone discomfort, musculoskeletal issues. I also make sure I pay close attention to your emotional state, because as we're going to learn today, there is a connection with that, with the emotional state and, psychological conditions and the gut. And the gut, I find, is a key to wellness. It kind of ties all of these things together. A friend of mine, one of my best friends, actually, she's a gastroenterologist. And I told her about the talk we were doing this evening. And her first comment was, make sure you tell them it's not FDA approved, because probiotics aren't necessarily needed. So in honor of her, I'm going to let you know that what I'm stating is based in evidence. All right. Even though probiotics are not FDA approved, they have been shown to be present, and evidence-based research shows that it's helpful in numerous conditions that we're going to discuss today. So what are some of those conditions? Well, this is the slide that really explains all the different areas of research out there on probiotics. So for most of you, you may have heard that term, but not every probiotic is the same. And Dr. Kidd, when he does his component of his presentation, will give you all the great science behind the organisms that we included in our probiotic development. But it's important to know that, because some probiotics don't even pass, acid in our gut. Some probiotics might even be placebo pills, but there are some that are effective. And if it's shown that they can colonize the intestinal wall lining and give us that good gut flora, the research says that they have a lot of benefits, including some of the ones that I mentioned here. Stimulating of the immune response. There has been evidence showing that probiotics, in fact, improve immunity. It increases your ability to digest foods. It has a positive influence on the development of the good bacteria in our gut. It's called the intestinal flora. It can reduce what we call the pH, that pH balance in your gut, and it helps keep your bowels regular. So a lot of times I'll have patients who may have irritable bowel, constipation, or diarrhea, and finding that right probiotic can be helpful for them. There's also studies that show that there are certain strains that help reduce cholesterol. Get that. And there are strains of organisms lead in probiotics that reduce toxicity. And that's a big area of interest for scientists now, are causes of toxins and how can we detoxify. And we have found evidence out there about toxic detoxification abilities of some of these good organisms. It does restore the good bacteria flora, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. So sometimes when we take medications like antibiotics or other medications that might harm the gut, you want to restore that good stuff, that good bacteria. And it can be helpful in treating acute diarrhea. So let's take a deeper dive in how probiotics help with infections. So what have we seen in the literature? And it's shown, it's been repeated in certain studies that probiotics can actually reduce the frequency of certain infections and help attenuate symptoms of such infections. So we have certain probiotic, and remember, probiotics are good gut bacteria that can help with yeast infections, can even be preventative and helpful for urinary tract infections. There are even some organisms that help with respiratory infections because they lower kind of your what's called histamine, your allergic response. Treating travelers' diarrhea, so a lot of people who have looser stools. And we've seen evidence, even though it's not consistent, that it's helpful with what's called Clostridium difficile. Now, Clostridium difficile is an infection that you get. It's an overgrowth of bad bacteria that occurs when you take a lot of antibiotics. And there are certain probiotic species that have been shown to help mitigate those symptoms. And there are even some studies that show probiotic bacteria, and these are names that you may not have seen before, but bifidobacterium and lactobacilli, both of which are included in our product, can help with the healing process or ameliorate some diseases. So things like inflammatory bowel disease, especially ulcerative colitis, probiotics may, in some cases, we're not saying across the board, but may, in some cases, be an alternative or used in conjunction with their current therapeutic intervention. And I love the fact that I treat a lot of women who have recurrent, yeast infections, because I do treat chronic infections, or they'll have recurrent bladder infections, something what we call cystitis. So they return and they're like, oh, my doctor kept putting me on these antibiotics and these antifungals, and I still have yeast. Or Dr. Cornish, I was still on a lot of antibiotics, but I still have UTIs. And I have found that certain probiotics can be useful in helping to mitigate those conditions, which I thought was fascinating. Now, let's take a look. I like this cartoon because it's a diagram that shows how antibiotics can kill both good and bad bacteria. One of my specialties is Lyme disease and co-infections. And a lot of times I find myself, in some cases, incorporating antibiotics in my paradigm. And I always tell patients that, look, Antibiotics are warranted in some severe cases, but at the same time, I'm going to work as hard as possible at giving the agents that you need to try to mitigate that, to try to help heal that gut lining so that when I'm doing the damage, I'm trying to prevent it by giving you something to try to help heal that. And that's when probiotics can be useful because antibiotics, some of them wipe out everything. The good bacteria that help with your immunity, the bad bacteria, and they can damage the gut lining. And that's what this is a picture of. So probiotics can actually help repair that gut wall. So that's what I mean, like having that balanced approach. And the European literature, and I have some listed here, they're kind of small, but there have been some studies out of Europe showing the benefits of probiotics, some strains, in pregnancy. Now, I know when I was pregnant with my children, I have a mom of triplets, and I knew that we were going to anticipate a C-section. And what they show is that children who don't receive that or have those vaginal deliveries, because when you have a vaginal delivery, you're going to get all that good bacteria from the mom's vaginal canal. And research has shown that C-section babies have a disadvantage when it comes to their, what we call microbiome, their gut flora. And it's also been shown that children who have C-sections are more likely to develop allergies, eczema, and other infections because probiotics have been shown in the literature to boost immunity. So during my pregnancy, I always share with my patients, I took 3 hefty probiotics, and luckily, I can't say it was all due to probiotics. I also had a really good lifestyle, but I know that incorporating the probiotics during my pregnancy helped to build the gut flora of my babies, and they don't have any GI issues, and they didn't have allergies, and they didn't have to be intubated, and they, didn't suffer from chronic infections, which you would expect from preterm infants. But I do think that lifestyle and the support of my gut bacteria had some part to play. So even when I have patients who are pregnant, I do walk through the risk and benefits of any kind of supplement, because as we stated, these are not methods that are approved by the FDA, but I have seen that because the newborn acquires the maternal, vaginal, and gut, that's the key word, microbiome, that good bacteria, it favors more good bacteria, natural bacteria, to colonize the gut. And so as a result of that, the oral intake after delivery, in the postnatal period, can, in some cases, improve gut colonization. And we've seen that some of the immunity markers have been shown to be different in kids who have stronger intestinal lining. All right. So this is what I found in some of the studies. So babies that have had probiotics, the literature shows they have less what we call colic. You've probably heard of that. Babies are crying, they're irritable, their gut is irritable and irritability, less diarrhea, less nausea, less respiratory infections, fewer incidents in some cases of preeclampsia, which, if you're not aware, is a complication during pregnancy that can cause blood pressure problems, gestational diabetes, which is just glucose imbalances during pregnancy, and fewer vaginal infections in the mom. All right, so then if we know that probiotics can be helpful while you're pregnant, then how does it help kids? All right, and these are also studies that I have found that show that there is a direct mode of communication. It's what I'm so passionate about, which is the gut-brain axis. So it's connected, the gut and the brain, by the longest nerve in our body, called the vagus nerve. And I told patients, if you put it in your gut, and you don't want to put it in your brain, don't put it there. Because one kid who came to my office, he had severe allergies and eczema and had a constipation. I think he was 6 years old. He may have had bowel movements once every 4 days. And mom said, yes, he's a picky eater. And I asked mom, okay, what kind of foods does he eat? Oh, McDonald's fries. He wanted that all day. McDonald's fries and, Big Macs. He had very selective, and it was all fast food related. And so I asked him, I said, hey, do you think if I put a Big Mac in your brain would be happy? Or if I poured some fries on your head will be happy? And he said, no. And I said, all right. So if you're putting it in your gut, because they're connected by the longest nerve in your body, don't put it in your brain. Don't put it in your gut if you don't want it in your brain, because those organisms, those toxins can cross into the brain barrier if your gut is damaged and you get something called leaky gut. So other things that have helped is reduce the need of antibiotic therapy in children. We've seen that there's publications of a direct correlation with kids who have taken antibiotics at a young age and mood instability later. There have been several publications showing that. And the clinical correlation is that taking antibiotics at a younger age leads to a disruption of that microbiome that I mentioned earlier, that good gut bacteria. So if the good gut bacteria can help build immunity, then wiping it out at a young age can lead to complications, neurological complications long term. And you also have a decrease in gut inflammation. The bowels are moving regularly. Long-term cognition has been shown to be better and improved in these kids. And then when you have imbalance, when you have more bad bacteria than good bacteria, the long word we use for that is something called dysbiosis. So you have more bad guys in your gut. That's when you start getting a higher risk of those neurological changes and autoimmune diseases and more kind of metabolic disorders. All right, so how do probiotics help in allergies? Because I mentioned earlier how patients with lower or deficient gut bacteria have a higher risk in allergy. I also told you how children who take probiotics have a lower risk of developing allergy. Now, what does it say in the research? Lactobacillus GG has been reported to treat allergies when it was administered to breastfeeding mothers of infants with dermatitis, like eczema, due to milk allergies. And it's also been shown that lactobacillus may be effective in treating allergic diseases if administered at birth and to pregnant mothers. So incorporating probiotics or prebiotics for a year reduced nasal allergies among volunteers who consumed those pro and prebiotics than control groups. And I've actually seen that myself, where patients who have severe allergies have taken probiotics that lower what you call histamine, which is produced when you have allergies, and allergies have improved. So how does that even work? How do probiotics treat allergy? Well, some of the ways it works, this is the mechanism of action. It kind of leads to normalization of the gut bacteria, that indigenous, what you're born with, and heals the gut barrier. And it also regulates the release of certain inflammatory markers. So inflammation is when your body is on fire, body is inflamed, and it promotes development of your immune system. And another thing that can occur with probiotic utilization is that it prevents food allergies. by promoting kind of healing of that gut barrier and decreasing intestinal and gut inflammation. So there are certain markers. IgE is one that can lead to histamine production that is sort of suppressed in the literature, it showed. So those are important things to understand. So what it's showing, the translation is healing the gut can lead to a decrease in allergies by not only healing that gut lining with probiotics, but decreasing so many of those inflammatory markers. So how does it correlate with our brain? So we talked about that word, microbiota, the gut-brain axis. So you have your intestine here, and you lose nutrient and fluid uptake, goes to the liver. You prevent malnourishment. Immune tolerance, we talked about how that works, and that leads to food allergies. It also can lead to defense against infections, so prevention of infections, and it can signal serotonin to the brain to help regulate the mood. And in my summary slide, this is a really good analogy, and this is a good diagram showing the brain and the gut. And I show this to all of my patients when I do my initial intake appointments. So the top of this picture is the brain, and the bottom represents your barrier, your gut lining, okay? And if you look inside here, you'll see what we call microbiota, that good bacteria, but then you see some bad things here, some bad toxins. And we call those endotoxins in functional medicine, but it's just the bad things that you don't want to escape out the gut. All right. So if you have a good diet and you're using probiotics and things like prebiotics, which are fermented foods, your barrier will be nice and intact. That's a great sign. That's, you're doing a great job. Your good bacteria is flourishing, and you have all those benefits we discussed earlier. However, when there's stress or infections or antibiotics or poor dieting, that's going to lead to that disruption of that gut border. And what's going to happen? Well, you're going to now have toxins leak outside the gut that you'd want to keep there. Here's another picture of that whole vagus nerve connection, that brain-gut connection here. Your immune cells will become dysfunctional. That's something we see a lot, immunodeficiency or autoimmune disease with gut disruption. You'll have problems with fatigue in some cases because the inflammation from that gut can lead to low production of one of the hormones, cortisol, gives us energy. And then it goes to the brain. So if I tell you, hey, the person has brain neuroinflammation due to gut imbalances, then that can be a result of what we call leaky gut. So things leaking outside of the gut that shouldn't be there, that could potentially cross the blood-brain barrier and cause brain inflammation. And that's why I'm so passionate about our product, is because it really focuses on those organisms that help with mood and other forms of brain health. So this slide here, it kind of just summarizes what actual pathway that gut imbalances activate and how it relates to the mood. And I'm going to let Dr. Kidd, who's going to go over all the science, he's going to tie that in for us so that we can talk about how inflammation and toxins and leaky gut have a direct correlation with mood instability. So once again, there's that brain, immune, gut triangle. So you have the brain here, you have your gut here, and you have all your immune cells. So we know that the brain has an immune interaction, the brain and the gut are connected, and the gut and the immune system are connected. So as we transition now to the science, this is just another summary of the brain and the gut connection and how stressors and immune activation and imbalances of your gut microbiome increase that risk of psychiatric illnesses, specifically anxiety and depression. So I thank you for your time this evening. If you haven't had a healthy snack, I hope you go get one right now. And I hope you realize the importance of taking care of your gut and incorporation of probiotics into your daily life plan because it can benefit everyone. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cornish. I'm now introducing Dr. Parris Kidd. Can you hear us, Dr. Kidd?
Yes, I can hear you, Jim.
Okay.
So that was a really nice presentation by Dr. Cornish, and she actually gave us already a lot of the science, and that's really, really good because BrainMD operates via science, especially clinical science. That's what we specialize in. That's what we do. And I'd like to thank Dr. Amen and Dr. Cornish for their expert input to the development of this product. Also, Jim and the entire BrainMD team for their understanding and patience as we progress with this very complex project. I appreciate that they accept that we have to go with the clinical research wherever it may lead us. So I'm going to spend some time on the science of the gut microbiome and on the new and really exciting broad spectrum probiotic product that the BrainMD team has developed called ProBrainBiotics MAX. And in order to really get into the full potential of probiotics, we have to understand that the human body hosts all sorts of tiny living things. The human body is actually a complex matrix of biological ecosystems. It consists not just of tens of trillions of human cells, but also tens of trillions of bacterial cells, fungi, viruses, protozoa, sometimes even worms. This is the reality of symbiosis, where species live with each other to get added benefit compared to living alone. Symbiosis is widespread in nature. The category of human symbiotic organisms that's been most studied is the bacteria. They're found everywhere there's a surface for them to occupy. The skin, the mouth, the nose, lungs, genitals, any other place where they can survive the physical and chemical conditions. Bacteria, these symbiotic bacteria can be powerful friends for us. They're able to survive under extreme environmental conditions. They're highly adaptable. They're versatile in exploiting food sources, and they can produce a broad array of substances that are useful for us. They even augment our energy supply. They also are important natural testers for our immune system. They help the system to always be alert and be on the lookout for trouble. But bacteria can also be powerful enemies. We have to count on the bad bacteria not becoming dominant over the good. And that's where probiotics come in. Each of us has a wide array of symbiotic arrangements with bacteria, ranging from very positive for us to very negative. So let's consider those various degrees of cooperation that we have, and then I'll move into the science of ProBrainBiotics MAX. So symbiosis then is long-term interactions between different species. The host and the guest can have a one-sided benefit, mutual benefit, or extremely one-sided benefit. And perhaps the most extreme example of symbiosis in nature is the presence of mitochondria located within all of our cells. Mitochondria are originally bacteria that came to live inside of our human cells and which are responsible now for generating over 90% of the energy that the cell generates. They have now given up some of their genes, and we make some of their proteins for them. And in return, they do all sorts of housekeeping for us and do a really good job of keeping us alive by generating energy. And it's not extreme to say that if we didn't have mitochondria, we could still be just lumps on the floor, just very, very limited communities of small numbers of cells. So then we have commensals, and the commensals are the bacteria that hang around. So the guests and maybe the hosts get some degree of benefit from the association. And the classic example of a commensal in nature is that early time when dogs were living around human camps. So they'd be around the edge of the camp, they'd get a little bit of food. Sometimes they'd get more lucky than other times. But then as both species evolved, it became more and more of a mutual benefit, so that it moved to a mutualism or mutual symbiosis. So now we have that type of relationship with dogs and pets. And with gut bacteria, many of the more than 1,000 species that are known to exist in the gut are probably commensals. Probably most of them are commensals. But then some of them are mutual. And then others are pathologic. These are ones where the host is being harmed by the presence of these guests. So we can't get rid of them. I'm thinking now of a particular house guest that I had some time back. You know, it's really hard to get rid of a house guest when they're feeding off of you, literally. So certain gut bacteria can breach the intestinal barrier and enter the circulation and begin to cause damage to our organs. And these are potentially disease-causing bacteria. These are bacteria that seek to take more than they get from us. And then the most extreme symbiosis is parasitism, in which the guest is so selfish that they actually weaken the host, sometimes to the point of death. We have examples of these all around us. There are all sorts of viruses. There are all sorts of gastrointestinal viruses, various species of bacteria, of which Dr. Cornish mentioned some, Clostridium difficile, for example. We have Candida yeast, amoebas and Giardia protozoa, and worms. So the microbiome influences, whatever their degree of symbiosis, also extend beyond the gut. So Dr. Cornish has done an excellent job of talking about the gut-brain axis, but there's also the gut immune axis, in which the gut bacteria stimulate the gut cells, the gut lining, to increase its immune vigilance or its immune readiness. And the gut's immune cells help to maintain the gut as a healthy habitat for the bacterial populations, at least the ones that they like. Then there's the gut-lung axis. The lung arises from the gut during early development. So it's anatomically analogous. It has a similar barrier lining, it has mucus, and it has immune surveillance, and it houses friendly bacteria. A much lower count than occurs in the gut, but still, it's believed that the lungs rely to some degree on friendly bacteria to function at their best. Then we have the gut-liver axis. So bacteria that get into the bloodstream from the gut make their first stop at the liver. And the liver can adapt to bacteria that escape, but also to the existing state of the gut microbiome. And the microbiome itself adapts to the bile chemistry, the chemistry of the bile fluids that come out of the liver, which assist with digestion, but which also can be very threatening to bacteria. So our most effective probiotic friends are able to tolerate bile very well. More on that later. Then there's the gut-gum axis, which is probably more likely the gum-gut axis. So the gums and the oral cavity, the mouth, house populations of bacteria. And these populations are constantly going down with saliva and with chewed food, etc., as we swallow and getting into the gut. So the best situation for the gut is to be getting good bacteria from the gum. And then conversely, it's been found that in cases of gut dysbiosis, severe bacterial negative imbalance, that can also adversely affect the health of the gums. And then there's the gut-skin axis. And as Dr. Cornish mentioned earlier, probiotics have consistently improved skin conditions in clinical trials. So are there axes between the gut and all the other organs? Very likely. They just remain to be further investigated and documented. So what this comes down to then in real life is that we are a holistic organism. There's a terrible scientific name for it called holobiont, but we are an integrated organism between human cells with the 46 chromosomes, about 38 trillion of them, and then upwards of another 38 trillion bacterial cells in the gut and elsewhere. And as their health goes, so does ours. So what are probiotics formally? And here I have to say that Dr. Cornish's friend was wrong. The probiotic ingredients have to be registered with the FDA, both as raw materials and as finished products. And the FDA reviews those submissions. And if they decide that a particular probiotic ingredient is potentially not safe, they will further investigate it. All dietary supplement ingredients have to be registered with the FDA, and probiotics are dietary supplements. So any good review of probiotics trots out this definition. Live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. The vast majority of probiotics are bacteria, but there are a few that are fungi. So how do probiotics help us? They assist with the digestion of our foods. They produce small molecules of fatty acids that have numerous benefits, including outside of the gut. These small fatty acid molecules actually can be used as fuel by the cells of the gut lining to generate energy. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but it's been estimated that gut bacteria can produce up to 10% of all the energy the body uses. They can produce, the friendly bacteria can produce the entire array of B vitamins. They can produce vitamin K, and they can produce other nutrients that benefit our human cells. They produce neurotransmitters that affect and regulate our brain function. They produce a wide array of messenger substances that can reach and influence other organs. And they constantly stimulate the gut immune cells to be alert and primed for action. That I cannot emphasize too much. If your gut bacteria are on your side, you're going to do a lot better to mobilize your immune system against any threat whatsoever. And I won't name any names. They support the barrier continuity of the gut lining. So the good bacteria put out substances in addition to the short chain fatty acids that actually stimulate the gut lining cells to make energy. And in that way, they're better able to maintain very tight side to side fit from one to the other, which literally keeps bacteria from squeezing through. Another major function I learned about for the friendly bacteria is that they stimulate the gut lining cells to produce mucus. So think of Jell-O. Think of a natural Jell-O continually being produced by our small intestine and large intestine lining. And that mucosal layer helps to keep bad bacteria out. If that layer gets breached, then the potentially disease-causing bacteria can get up against the gut lining cells and push until they break through and get into the blood. The friendly bacteria can actually crowd out unfriendly bacteria by physically taking up more space than they do. And they also produce repellent substances called bacteriocins, which help to push away unfriendly bacteria. They assist with detoxification of pollutants, all the junk that can come into the intestine. And they enhance the functioning of the gut, the brain, the immune system, and the other organs, both directly and indirectly. And how do we hurt them? These bacteria that are trying to be our friends, they're very adaptable. Some of them are very hardy, but they're not so good with poor diet, especially foods that are low in fiber. If you want to have a good, excellent microbiome, you need to consume a very substantial amount of fiber. Now, fiber is defined as the stuff that's left over when we've finished digesting. It's usually complex carbohydrates, and they love that stuff. They break down complex carbohydrates, they break them down into the short chain fatty acids that I mentioned earlier, and all sorts of other nice stuff. So someone who is eating a lot of Big Macs or other types of fast foods that are low in fiber and low otherwise in nutrients are not doing a good job of feeding the friendly bacteria, because also the friendly bacteria need to get the B vitamins and vitamin K and stuff. They can make some of that, but other vitamins and nutrients, they need to get from us. They need to get from our foods. Any sort of stress, emotional, chemical, physical, infectious stress, any sort of stress will put pressure on our microbiome. Smoking, any toxic substances that come into the lungs will eventually produce other substances that get into the circulation and get to the gut. And then as the gut lining is affected, they're less able to support the presence of the friendly bacteria. And here also I lump in cosmetic products, because a lot of people don't realize how very toxic some of those ingredients of cosmetic products are. And this includes all the personal care, personal hygiene type of products. Deficiencies of vitamin D, folate, other vitamins and essential minerals all can affect our microbiome. A huge array of medications. So many medications are toxic. And the medications that are toxic to us, that have adverse side effects on us, are very likely also going to have adverse effects on the microbiome. So antibiotics, laxatives, proton pump inhibitors, that over-the-counter stuff, and many other medications. Herbicides and pesticides that come in via the air, foods, water, or any other sources, including as pollutants in foods that we believe may be clean. If anyone out there who's not able to afford organic foods, think about rinsing your food in a little bit of soapy water and then washing that off and drying it, and that'll kill some of the, that'll remove some of those nasty chemicals. So I want to thank Steve Ramdani for helping me with this diagram. This is an effort to show or to enlighten you on how probiotics survive the treacherous journey through the very acidic conditions of the stomach, and to eventually settle either in the small intestine or more commonly the large intestine. The numbers of bacteria in these various zones are related to the difficulties of surviving the local conditions. So in the stomach, the conditions are very, very adverse, incredibly acidic, digestive enzymes, hardly any mucus to stick to. And so there's less than 1,000 per gram. And think of a gram as about a fifth of a teaspoon, of a flat teaspoon. In the small intestine, the numbers can reach up to 1 billion per gram. It's a little bit more stable environment. There's some mucus and a bit more friendly overall. But it's in the large intestine, the colon, where the numbers peak. And there they can get up to 1 trillion per gram. So the walls of the colon also do allow for vitamins and other food breakdown products coming from the microbiome to be absorbed into the bloodstream. So the colon is a kind of fermentation chamber. It's our equivalent of what cows have, or even giraffes. Ask sometime about how a giraffe ferments its food. It's very interesting. But the colon is our fermenter and gives us a last chance to acquire nutrients and other useful substances from the digestive process and the presence of the microbiome. So our product then has two main categories, lactobacilli and bifidobacteria. Now, these are the categories of bacteria that can be cultured and can be made in sufficient quantities to be used as dietary supplements. But the vast majority of probiotics still have not been fully characterized, and there are all sorts of very, very interesting probiotic species and strains still to be further investigated and cultured up. So the lactobacilli then are rod-shaped bacteria. They can survive with or without oxygen. That makes them quite versatile at where they can live. And they're good at crowding out other bacteria. They ferment foods to lactic acid and other acids, which helps them to make their surrounding environment acidic. And this helps to suppress bad bacteria that could damage the gut. They produce lots of bacteriocins that can repel such nasty species as Helicobacter, Clostridium, E. coli, even some viruses. They produce the short-chain fatty acids that I mentioned earlier. And the short-chain fatty acids also enter the circulation and can provide energy for other organs, including the liver and muscles. And the lactobacilli are also good at producing major transmitters, neurotransmitters, including GABA, serotonin, acetylcholine, and dopamine. And it's very clear that some of these can influence the activity of the brain by way of the vagus nerve. The bifidobacteria are called bifid because they have a branched or Y shape, and they thrive especially in the colon. They're highly versatile functionally. If you look on the left there, you'll see all these different types of categories of proteins, so-called anti-inflammatory proteins, enzymes that have mechanisms to utilize the carbohydrates, other types of proteins called adhesins that help them to stick to the mucus. And that long brown one is called a pili, which is actually a kind of nail that helps it to nail itself into the mucus and make it very hard to dislodge. So the bifidobacteria, and then there's so-called moonlighting proteins. And I wondered, what is a moonlighting protein? A moonlighting protein is basically a protein that is known to have one function, but is believed to have certain other functions. And so some of these bifidobacteria proteins are doing several things, and we don't fully understand what they do. But one of the things they can do is produce GABA, and then they're also good at restraining that very nasty E. coli, the O157H7, which actually has been known to take people's lives from contaminated foods. They also can restrain salmonella and Clostridium difficile, rotaviruses and noroviruses. They decline in numbers with advancing age, and so the bifidobacteria are particularly important for us to consider replenishing. And the bifidobacteria do a whole lot more besides promoting gut immune surveillance. Here you see at the top right there, an immune cell that's actually poking a process in between the immune cells and out into the mucus. And these tendrils, these long processes reach out and feel around in the mucus and make contact with bacteria and then respond appropriately. And when they make contact with bifidobacteria, they're actually being stimulated in very positive ways in terms of immune defense. The bifidobacteria also can antagonize some of the pathogens I mentioned earlier. They can help to block and to metabolize potential toxins. And overall, they're very good regulators or modulators of the total content of the microbiome, especially in the colon. So ProBrainBiotics MAX then consists of 7 strains researched in clinical trials. I made a point of making sure that all of the strains had clinical trials because it's very hard for me to see probiotic products being offered to consumers when they don't have clinical proof that they work. Without the clinical proof, there is no magic. It's just so very important to study probiotic strains under controlled conditions and get clinical data that they actually work. So for this product, we say that it supports positive mood and coping with stress. It helps to moderate occasional anxious feelings, promotes healthy antibody and cellular immunity, promotes healthy oral and intestinal probiotic balance, and promotes bowel regularity and overall bowel comfort. And you'll see there that we have them packaged in blister packs to maintain these live probiotic bacteria for the full lifespan of the product. And it's 30 billion count of live units, colony forming units, but more isn't necessarily better. It's what matters is that the right exact strains are being used as shown in clinical trials, and that these strains actually are being used in the full clinical potency. So the most abundant one in the mix is Bifidobacterium lactis HN019, which is good for general immunity, for gum immunity, for gut function, for gut comfort, and for the gut microbiota, in the sense that by taking this particular strain, you actually can improve the numbers of your lactobacilli and other bifidobacteria, as well as having this strain increase. Then we have the mixture of Lactobacillus helveticus and Bifidobacterium longum, 52 and 175. And these are the two primary brain strains in this mix. And this combination, this specific combination used in a specific ratio, improved mood as well as anger and hostility in middle-aged healthy people under stress. And then another subgroup who were under less stress also showed improvements on obsessions, compulsions, and paranoia. These two strains also improve gut function, and in a recent trial, they also improve the quality of sleep, as well as, again, improving mood. Bifidum R71 improved immunity in a large trial with American college students under exam stress. And these kids were apparently really under some very serious pressure. And taking this versus a placebo, they got fewer colds or flus, and they slept better, and they had fewer incidents of diarrhea. Bifidobacterium longum, BB536, has been studied for 4 decades, and it's the leading probiotic in Japan. It resides continuously in the gut, and it's fantastic for gut health. And like certain of the others, it makes the gut environment more receptive to both lactobacilli and bifidobacteria. It raises the levels of secretory IgE, and in Japan has been found to help to stave off allergic responses to pollen in 2 trials. It produces folate, and it stimulates other gut bacteria to make biotin as well as butyrate, an important short-chain fatty acid. And then we have 2 strains of Lactobacillus plantarum, which are closely related. They're very tolerant to acidity, and they also can manage bile salts coming from the liver, and they can stick very well to the mucus lining. They have worked very well for immunity in a 1-to-1 ratio at the same dose as we have in this product. Both trials were with elderly people over age 65. They increased the numbers of immune cells, they lowered the level of a pro-inflammatory messenger substance, and they increased the levels of secretory IgA, which provides broad defense against anything foreign. They've also, these 2 plantarum strains also improve gut function in these elderly subjects. So who can this supplement help really quickly? Basically, anyone living in today's world, whether you're under mood pressures, stress, poor dietary habits, exposed to pollutants, whether you have digestive challenges, you're using over-the-counter medications for GI function, which is probably not a good idea. You probably ought to see an AMN functional physician like Dr. Cornish. People who are regularly using alcohol, it can tear up their insides. Smokers, people on current or recent course of antibiotics, anyone who needs better immunity, and it's fair to assume that that's the case for all of us. And the elderly, typically friendly bacteria are depleted in the elderly, and their immunity is suboptimal, and often their digestive function is poor. And these probiotics can help all of that. So you always take this product with food. 1 capsule a day is more than sufficient. Children can also take it at 1 cap. It's free from all the common allergens. It has very, very tiny amounts of soy and dairy, but I would not hesitate to take it myself if I had either soy or dairy intolerances. It's compatible with keto and paleo patterns. And if you want to get the full benefit from this product, you should also consider taking Neurovite Plus and omega-3 Power, and possibly also smart mushrooms and neurogreens. So love, respect, and treasure your microbiome. It's sharing your life with you, and it's best for you to support and cherish it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kidd and Dr. Cornish. That was excellent. Lots of really great information. And we apologize. We had some technical difficulties, and we realized that our chat function was not working during the webinar. So anybody that has questions, please just reply to your Eventbrite invitation and we'll get those questions, and within a week, we'll answer them all for you and send them out. And also, I wanted to remind you about the 15% discount. We'll be sending out a code on that. And then I forgot, we also have a 20% coupon on our new ProBrainBiotics MAX. So thank you for your time, and I hope you all have a great day.